In November 1796, Miss Hannah Latimer rang this bell to start the first day of school at the just completed brick school in the old farm district of Wintonbury. The previous year, Connecticut sold its land in the Western Reserve in Ohio, a remnant of the original royal sea-to-sea land grant for the colony of Connecticut. That charter stated that the land was to go to the South Sea on the west part. The South Sea is now called the Pacific Ocean. The sale netted $1,200,000, which was divided and distributed to all the towns of Connecticut to be used for wages of teachers. In April of that year, this ad appeared in the Connecticut Current. These subscribers wished to contract for the building of a brick schoolhouse in Wintonbury, 34 by 22 feet. Any person wishing to contract to furnish materials and complete the building is desired to call on the subscribers before the 1st of May, who will pay them money for the work. Samuel Eggleston, George Latimer, Jacob Loomis, Windsor, April 20th. Wintonbury was a parish of Windsor. Schools until this time were under the control of the Ecclesiastical Society of the Congregational Church. Now each district would select a school committee to run its own school. Sam Eggleston, a brickmaker, lived next to the proposed location. J. Loomis, a carpenter, and George Latimer, a captain in the Revolutionary War, also lived nearby. 6 months later, the school was completed and Miss Hannah Latimer, the daughter of Captain Latimer, was the first teacher. The bell was a gift of Frederick Bull, a public-spirited Hartford businessman who lived in Wintonbury on what is now Blue Hills Avenue. It was the first bell in town, and it was to be rung not only for the beginning of school each day, but also for public functions, church services, and funerals, as well as notifying residents of fire. Sadly, the first funeral knell was for the unexpected death at age 44 of Mr. Bull in 1797. For generations, the bell rang at 8:30 and 9 a.m., 12 noon, and at 1 and 4 p.m. Its clear ringings could be heard for miles and were appreciated by residents before clocks and watches were common. The noon tolling told farmers it was dinner time, and the 4 o'clock bell said it was time to bring the cows in for afternoon milking. This idealized painting of the old farm school was done by artist Frank D. Coles in 1968. Initially, the door of the brick school, as it was known for many years, was in the center of the building, and the brickwork still reveals where it was located. There were fireplaces at each end that were fueled by the 3 feet of wood each scholar, as the students were then called, was required to bring at the beginning of the school year, or the child shall be debarred of the common use of the fire, presumably meaning having to sit farther away from the heat. In 1815, a brick stove was installed and 1 fireplace was removed. In 1826, the single door was moved to one end where it is now. During its 125 years as a school, it had no indoor plumbing or electricity. When meetings were held in the evening, men were asked to bring lanterns. There was a double outhouse behind the school, one side for girls, the other for boys. Water was drawn from the nearby Old Farms Brook that ran fuller in those days than it does today. Everyone shared a common dipper for drinking water. For about the first 100 years or so, school was in session for 4 winter months, November to March, and 4 months in the summer. It was not held during spring planting or fall harvest, so the children could help with the work in the fields. Attendance was not very good because scholars often were needed for work at home or on the farm, and often very cold or snowy days kept them at home, especially the little ones because of the long walks. The earliest teachers needed to have completed only normal school, which was the 8 grades they would be teaching. A list of all the teachers of the old farm school has been compiled, and many familiar Bloomfield family names are among them. Teachers not only prepared and gave the lessons, but were responsible for all the duties involved in running the small schoolhouse, such as stoking the fire, clearing snow, and bringing in water. Older students helped the teachers with these chores. Early wages were about $1 per week with board furnished, or $2 a week if one furnished one's own board. Men teachers were paid more since they were considered heads of household. The first scholars were seated on 2 rows of benches at the sides, the boys on one side and the girls on the other. In 1823, a desk was built along the walls with a bench in front of it. The desks that are displayed here today are a sampling from many different decades. Several generations of teachers gave lessons from this desk. The clock, first used in 1893, was still in service when the school closed in 1921. The studies were reading, writing, and arithmetic, as well as geography, English grammar, and spelling. The girls learned sewing, working on sheets, shirts, and bed quilts. The size of the class varied. There could be as many as 50 students for one teacher. In 1851, there were 48 scholars listed. In 1861, there were 71 with 2 teachers. It was not until 1829 that the upper floor was used as a classroom for older scholars. These original desks and seats were built right into the floor, and where some were removed, holes in the floor remain. In spite of the fact that these wooden desks were used for 38 years until the second floor classroom was discontinued in 1867, there are relatively few carvings on them, although there are some. If the student marked a desk, the parents had to pay a fine, and the parents did not always spare the rod. Originally, the staircase was located on the outside, and you can still see on the exterior wall where it had been. It wasn't until about 1843 that the inside staircase was built. Think about the thousands of students who entered this school and received the fundamentals of their early education from 1796 until the school was closed in 1921. Many went on to become successful farmers, lawyers, ministers, teachers, and businessmen, as well as important civic leaders. One of the most prominent was an early advocate for children in Connecticut, Virginia Thrall Smith, among whose achievements was starting the Connecticut Children's Aid Society, now the Village for Families and Children, and she was instrumental in starting the Newington Home for Crippled Children, which has evolved into today's Connecticut Children's Medical Center. However, not all 18th century scholars were ideal scholars. Discipline could be a problem. Connecticut law had a provision that town selectmen had to make sure children did not grow up rude, stubborn, and unruly. Annual reports often remarked about unruly students. An 1890 Bloomfield town report states, "Lady teachers are generally very good in their teaching and have the faculty of controlling the scholars pleasantly. Their government is generally successful with the scholars, including the boys. Notwithstanding these facts, some boys need a man's government." After it closed as a school, the building was used for public meetings. From 1931 to 1971, the American Legion met here, adding a small kitchen to the back of the building. A document in Windsor's early records indicate that the triangle of land on which the school was built was to remain forever dedicated to community use. When the state and town decided to straighten School Street to correct a dangerous intersection, arrangements were made to exchange the triangle the school was on for land across the street to the west, next to the Eggleston House. But this meant the school, then more than 180 years old, would have to be moved if it were to be saved. Before this could happen, the school, weighing nearly 90 tons, had to be repaired and stabilized, both on the inside and externally. Excavating and grading work at the new site was started in September 1976, and the school was moved in October of that year. Richard W. Bartlett, an architect and president of the Winterberry Historical Society at that time, planned and supervised the move. It was jacked up 3 feet, and 3 sets of 8-wheeled dollies were rolled underneath for the 100-foot move to the new site. After the move, School Street could then be aligned with that part of the street south of Park Avenue. Interior renovations had to wait for several years until the society could raise funds. The first floor was restored and opened to the public in 1987. And 2 years later, the second floor was ready to be opened. The building was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1972. 1796 was the year that George Washington gave his farewell address as his second term was winding down. In his address, he said, "Promote then, as an object of primary importance, institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge." 1796 was also the year that the Old Farm School was completed and welcomed its first scholars to begin to reap the benefits of this general diffusion of knowledge. This historic Bloomfield School is open to visitors Sunday afternoons from mid-May until Columbus Day. You are invited to come and get insights into the challenges that both teachers and students encountered in early education over 2 centuries ago.